So welcome to this evening's webinar, where we're going to tell you a little bit about our MSc in Flood Risk Management. My name's Daniel Parsons, and I head up the Energy and Environment Institute here at the University of Hull. The Institute is really a fusion of research and high-level teaching in and around big global challenge areas. So we fuse together the challenge areas associated with climate change, with environmental resilience, and with a low carbon agenda. So really exploring the interfaces between energy and the environment. Now, one of the key themes within that is flood risk, flood hazard, and broader flood management, and the MSc has been born out of the pioneering research that the team has been undertaking for a number of years here at Hull. So I'm going to pass you over now to Stewart Mcclelland, who's leading this webinar this evening. Introduce you to the rest of the team, and then introduce you as a whole to the MSc and what it offers in terms of both the course and the longer term prospects that come from coming here and studying with us on this MSc. So over to you, Stewart.
Great, thank you very much, Dan. And welcome everyone to our webinar on the MSc in Flood Risk Management. I'm just going to briefly introduce you to my colleagues Tom Coulthard and Stephen Forrest, who both lecture on the programme and are involved in delivering the teaching that we do. We've also got with us this evening Leon Kaplan, who's one of the students on the course. So myself and Stephen are going to present to you some of the details of the course, tell you about how it works and what we teach, and then that'll go on for about half an hour or so, and then we'll come back together with Tom, myself, Stephen and Leon, and we'll be able to answer any questions that anyone has about the programme, and hopefully you'll be better informed by the end of it and know a lot more about what we do and what the opportunities are. So first of all, I'll just introduce the presentation and explain to you what we're going to be covering this evening.
Can I say one thing really quickly? Sorry, can I just say one thing really quickly? If anyone's got any questions that they want asked at the end, post them in the questions box or in the live chat. And if anyone has any, and we'll try and answer those at the end. If anyone has any questions about things going on during the presentation, pop those in the chat and I'll try and answer them as we're going along. Sorry, Stuart, over to you.
No, that's great, Tom. Thanks. Yeah. So yeah, just feel free to give us any questions you have at all. Okay, so what we're going to do this evening then is take you through what's involved in the MSc programme. First of all, explaining to you a bit about why flood management is so important, and then share a video with you about the student experience and tell you a bit about some of the employer views. And then we'll look in detail at the programme, at what we actually teach and what the content of the programme is. And finally, I'll say a few things about how we've tried to make the course as flexible and as inclusive as we possibly can, so that it's available for anyone to study both part-time and full-time. So there's lots of different options about how you can share the course with us. And then we'll finish off, as I said, with a summary and a Q&A session where you can ask us any questions you like about the course and what we teach, and all of us here will be able to answer those questions for you. So to begin with, Stephen's just going to say a few things and cover some of the global issues that there are surrounding floods and why this course is so important. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen for the next slide and a few following that.
Well, hello everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Stuart. Thanks for tuning into this webinar. I'm going to be talking about flooding as a global issue. Globally, flooding is an urgent societal problem estimated to affect about 160 million people every year. On the screen, you can just see a few of the flood events that have happened recently, and you can see that they're geographically diverse, with floods in India, especially relating to monsoon flooding in the state of Kerala, the East African floods of 2020, which affected a number of African countries and at least 700,000 people. We also have the floods in Brazil, which only happened a few weeks ago in the Grande do Sul, after a month's worth of rain fell in 2 hours. And then on the last picture shows Kentucky in the USA, where there was river flooding in March, only a few weeks ago as well. There were 49 local declarations of disaster across the state. To summarize, flooding is a global issue and it's an urgent one. Next slide, please, Stuart. So why should you study flood risk management? Where's the wider relevance? Well, as I said, it is a global issue and it's a very internationally relevant issue. And there are many global frameworks that need flood risk management and try and build flood resilience. We of course have the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, as you can see on the slide, and their Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. These are the obvious ones. You also have the Paris Climate Agreement that came into effect recently. However, it's all linked together and it's linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that can transform our world. To summarize, it is a globally important topic. Next slide, please. And flood risk is increasing. By 2050, we're estimating 2 billion people will be vulnerable to flood disasters, and hundreds of millions of others will be likely to be displaced by water disasters, stresses, and shocks. This is because of a range of factors. For example, climate change, where we're going to see more extreme and frequent intense rainfall periods and sea level rise, but also due to urbanization and urban growth and inappropriate floodplain development. Next slide, please. It is an urgent societal issue, especially in the UK. Now, there are questions over how we will cope with this and how we will manage this increasing flood risk. Traditionally, we focus on hazard control and building up these big barriers, these sea walls, etc. But can we continue to do that? Is it sustainable for the future? Can we keep erecting these barriers? Or do we need to start building natural flood defenses upstream? And instead of just focusing on these engineering structures, these technical measures, maybe we also need to take more holistic approaches that include aspects such as spatial planning, and especially citizens and communities, where we can learn to live with floods and live with water and build resilience to future flood events. Next slide. And as I've been saying, and this is just to hammer home the point, it is an urgent issue for society. These are just a few newspaper clippings from the last few weeks. We can see questions over how flooding is managed in the UK. Is money being spent correctly? Is it being spent on the right types of flood protection measures or flood resilience measures? And then we also had the Snaith flooding. This was a flood event a year ago. This happened at the beginning or near the beginning of COVID, yet residents still haven't been able to return home yet a year later. It is an important issue and it has big effects and consequences on the people who are affected by it. In terms of politics, flood risk is also seen as the next major housing scandal, with the number of new homes built in the UK on floodplains being predicted to rise by over 50% in the next 50 years. There's going to be a lot of flood risk, and we need to be able to manage this in the future. Next slide. And I think I'll pass over to Stewart on this point.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So I'm just going to take you through a few more general slides that introduce why it's important to study flood risk management and why it's good to study flood risk management here at the University of Hull. I think first of all, to set the context, the Environment Agency recently published the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy for England. That really set the scene for some of the pressures that we're facing in the future. The UK has seen 16 centimetres of sea level rise since 1900. It's warmer than it was before, and temperatures are going to keep increasing. And there could be up to 60% more precipitation in winters by 2050. All of these factors lead to an increased risk of flooding. And really, what the Environment Agency was saying is that we need to build a society, a nation essentially, that's ready to be resilient in the face of more flooding and coastal change, both today, because we're already facing these pressures, but also tomorrow and towards the year 2100, when we're going to be under considerably greater pressure, particularly in terms of sea level rise, but also in terms of more rainfall and inevitably, therefore, more potential flooding events. And how do we deal with that risk? Essentially, we need to think about flood risk management. So we need to build a society which is able to be more resilient in the face of those growing risks. It's not going to be enough, as Stephen was saying, just to build walls higher. We need to think about alternative approaches to managing what that flood risk might be. In particular, at the University of Hull, we're interested in natural flood management, like the picture shows there, where we build leaky dams in the upstream parts of catchments to slow the flow of water through that catchment. We need to look at these approaches and understand them better so that we can deploy them much more widely and use techniques like this to help reduce the impact of flooding in the future. And thinking more in particular about Hull and why Hull is a good place to come and look at flood risk management, there's two big drivers of why we've developed this program and why we want to deliver this teaching. One is that in the region of Hull and East Riding, we have a big scheme called Living with Water, where we work with a number of partners to look at how we can help people to be more resilient and to live better with flood events. And outside London, the Humber is actually one of the regions of the UK with the greatest flood risk and the greatest investment in flood risk reduction measures. Also, Hull has been selected as one of the 5 cities in the Global City Water Resilience Framework, which was developed by Arab and is supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, looking in particular at ways at which cities who are basically at threat from water can develop a more resilient future. And Hull itself we can actually see as a living laboratory for flood risk management. There's a whole load of things going on in and around the city where we are adapting to and learning to live with water. And that's from very large pieces of infrastructure like the Hull tidal surge barrier, which sits down at the mouth of the River Hull and protects the city from tidal flooding, but interestingly has also been used to help prevent flooding from the River Hull in recent weeks. There's also been huge investment in the Hull frontage scheme to basically make the flood protection against tidal surges even better. And over 42 million has been invested in basically increasing the height and improving flood defences across the city frontage. We can also see lots of examples of small scale action against flooding through the city, like the building of floodgates for properties round about the waterfront, but also property level protection measures, which again, an area of interest in the university in looking at sustainable urban drainage and thinking about how we can provide protection at a small scale. Examples like water butts to store water, and again, change the patterns of water flow within urban areas. So next, I'm going to share with you a brief film which tells you something about studying as a student in Hull, but also gives you some input from employers and what their view of the MSc program is. So I'm just going to share this video. Please note that the video may appear behind the main screen on your display.
Here in Hull, there's a lot of research on natural systems and challenges such as climate change and flood risk, and I'm excited to contribute to these studies. But the benefits of studying in Hull is definitely that there are a lot of applied and fundamental projects related to issues such as flood risk and climate change, and this results in a lot of knowledge from different perspectives.
I get involved in flood risk projects and environmental projects all over the world. But it's great to talk a little bit about the MSc in Flood Risk Management at Hull. Hull is just one of the best places that you could come to study about flood risk management. All different aspects of flood risk that you could encounter around the world are here in Hull.
Flooding is the most recorded natural disaster on this planet. In the last 2 decades alone, 2 billion people, a third of the population of this globe, has been impacted in one way or another by a large-scale flood event, the opportunities in this sphere of the world right now are endless. It's the place to be, and it's the place to be for me because you can impact the lives of generations now and in the future.
I think it's really important to study natural flood management because it's something that's only going to get worse in the future. So it's important that we learn to be able to live with flooding and sort of manage floods, but also be able to mitigate, to be able to reduce the negative impacts like loss of life and destruction of infrastructure.
I was a partner in the development of the world-leading city water resilience approach with the Rockefeller Foundation, the Resilience Shift, World Bank and Arab, and Hull is a global pilot city for that initiative.
At Hull we have a whole host of experience from both academic and industry partners, as well as access to high-resolution survey-grade equipment such as drones, the terrestrial laser scanner, as well as the total environment simulator.
Being within the Energy and Environment Institute has also been really great, being constantly surrounded by so many postgraduate researchers and lecturers with such a broad knowledge base and a wide variety of fields. I look forward to completing my PhD and to having a career within the research industry and helping towards a more sustainable future.
Every place experiences flood risk in different ways, so flood risk management opportunities across the UK vary from place to place. That being said, there are common areas of opportunity within risk management authorities and across the wider sector.
As a company, Arab, we recruit a large number of graduates each year, and we're always looking for good people who know their subject, who are good team workers, but also people who are able to understand the community, politicians, stakeholders, and to translate those aspirations into technical solutions.
Hopefully you're back with the presentation now. And what we want to do now is just take you through some of the information about the teaching programme and explain to you what the course is all about in detail. But first of all, I'd just like to introduce you to the teaching team. You've met myself, Stewart Mcclelland. I'm the programme leader and Deputy Director at the Energy and Environment Institute. You've also met Stephen. He's a lecturer in flood resilience and sustainable transformations, and he teaches on the programme as well, along with Tom Coulthard, who's a professor of physical geography. He particularly specialises in environmental modelling. And then we have Rob Thomas, who specialises in the geomorphology of flood risk, and Chris Skinner, who looks at computer modelling and flooding in geomorphology. And also Professor Dan Parsons, who you met at the beginning, who also is involved in delivering the programme. So just to explain to you how the programme is put together, we've developed this programme in conjunction with people from the Environment Agency and also from consultancy specialists who've all contributed their ideas along with our academic background to look at what would be the best way of trying to understand better what's needed for flood risk management. And we've developed this course with a number of taught modules along with a dissertation project which you research yourselves. So we're just going to talk through each of these different modules and say a few words about what we teach in each of them. You'll see that if you're a full-time student, it's split up into 3 trimesters. So we split the academic year up into 3 different parts. And in the first trimester, we study 3 taught modules, one called Water and the Environment, then one on flood impacts, living with floods, and then a 3rd module on flood resilience, living with water. Then in the second trimester, so that would effectively be after Christmas, we again have 3 taught modules, the first on modelling flood events, then on flood adaptation and mitigation, and finally a module on managing flood incidents. And then once you've completed that taught element of the programme, and that's worth 120 credits, you then go on to the research element of the MSc. And in the research element, you do a flood risk management dissertation project. And I'll say a little bit more about that towards the end, but that's a project that you develop and choose yourself where you study an area of flood risk management that particularly interests you. So I'm just going to talk briefly through each of the modules and tell you something about what's covered in each of them. So in the first module, water in the environment, we're basically interested in looking at the hydrological and hydraulic processes that control how water moves through the landscape. So we're basically trying to understand the flow paths that water follows from when it rains on a catchment, where the water flows across that catchment, and how it gets into the river channels. Because that's essentially how we can understand how we might be able to control and mitigate against large precipitation events that will drive and potentially cause flooding. And this module will include a number of practical skills, both working in the laboratory, but also looking in the field to understand actually how we measure and understand the movement of flow through the landscape. Sorry, went on one slide too far there. The second module is called Flood Impacts, looking with floods. And basically here we're interested in terms of floods, in understanding the different sources of flood hazards that we have, because floods aren't only caused by rivers, they're also potentially caused by groundwater, but also by sewer systems in urban areas, and potentially also tidal flooding. So in this module, we're interested in looking at the different ways in which floods can occur and the different types of floods that can occur so that we can understand the impact that they'll have on people. And also an important element of this is understanding how flood hazards are going to change in the future. So what's the impact of climate change? Is that going to see flooding increase in frequency, or is it going to be increases in magnitude? And what we find is that's different in different places. And we need to understand what the controls might be on making floods of different sizes. And we also tie in this module looking at sustainable drainage schemes, so SUDs, and other strategies that we have in order to try and reduce flood risks, because these are an important part of how we might build resilience in the future. And that leads us on to the third module called Flood Resilience, Living with Water. And we tie this module closely in with the Living with Water initiative that's based in Hull and East Riding. And essentially what this module is all about is understanding that ultimately we can't prevent flooding. It's not going to stop. Flooding is really here to stay with us. And there are economic and practical limitations, which means that we can't just build higher and higher walls to hold back floodwaters. We need to look for alternative ways to live with that flood risk. We essentially have to live with water and live with flood events and understand that how we can build resilience to them. So what are the ways in which people can adapt to flooding and basically reduce the impact of it on their lives and the impact on their livelihoods. And that's the three modules that we cover during the first semester. Moving on to the second semester, we start looking at how we actually go about modelling flood events. So Tom leads this module and looks at some of the numerical modelling tools that we have available to us to understand how we can predict the magnitude of flooding and the extent of flooding with computer models. And basically, in this module, we take you through practically how you go about predicting what flood risks might look like. And essentially what this module is all about is not about how you code a flood model or how you would write a flood model, but it's really about how you use flood models so that everybody that's gone through this course will have an understanding of how numerical models work and how we can interrogate the results that they produce. And this is really important because numerical modeling is a really important tool for people to understand flood risk, and we have to know what results and what pictures like this that we see might mean for us. Module 5 is all about flood adaptation and mitigation, so thinking about how we can actually manage flood risk. So we know that we can build concrete walls, but there are lots of other approaches that we can take in order to reduce and manage the flood risk that we have to people. Natural flood management is a big element of that, and that people are very interested in at the moment, and that we've done a lot of research work on in the EEI. And that's all about ways in which we can change the flow paths of water through a catchment, basically to slow down the movement of water. And if we can slow it down, that means that we can have an impact on the types of flood events that might occur. So we can basically look at new approaches to managing flood risk that avoid the need to build walls, which is an expensive approach and not always possible to implement. But if we can look at alternative ways, then we can hold the water back, slow it down, and reduce flood risk. And then the final talk module is all about managing flood incidents. And this is all about thinking about how we can respond effectively to floods, because if we can make an effective response to a flood event, then we can reduce the impact that it has on people, industry, and livelihoods. And in essence, one of the key things to remember is that we can't actually prevent flooding happening. As we see from the examples that Stephen showed you right at the beginning of this lecture, flood events happen. They happen all the time. It's a risk that we have to live with and manage. And it's how we manage and how we respond to flood events that can reduce and minimize the impact that they have on people. So this module is all about taking the expertise that we have in lots of different areas of managing flood risk and understanding how that's applied to reduce the impact of flood events and enable people to essentially to be more resilient to flood events when they happen and to be able to recover more quickly after a flood event has occurred. So at the end of all of the talk modules, we move on to the Flood Risk Management Dissertation project. And essentially the dissertation project is an opportunity for students to choose where they want to focus on. So it allows you to develop a project that you want to research in greater depth in a particular area of flood risk management that you're interested in. And what we do with this module is also link up with future employers. So that's people like the Environment Agency, the local authorities, consultancies, and other external organisations that have an interest in managing flood risk, and work with them to develop projects with students so that students can work with an external agency. Or you can choose your own project of an area in particular that you're particularly interested in. And essentially you'll research that in depth and produce your own report at the end of that module. So how will you learn? Essentially, we will employ lots of different teaching approaches that make an interesting and dynamic course experience for you. So there's a mixture of lectures, workshops, and seminars. In most modules, we have field work so that you're able to see flood resilience practice in action. We also make use of a number of guest lectures and international experts and professionals within the sector to come in and talk to you and give you a much broader experience of what flood risk management is really like. And all that's tied in with some practical teaching so that you can learn the hands-on skills of actually how flows are measured on how we respond to flood events. And alongside all of that teaching, we also have tutorials to support you individually and in small groups, in particular for developing your dissertation projects. So finally, I'm just going to say a few things about how we've designed the course to be flexible and inclusive so that as many people as possible are able to study the programme. You can study individual modules by themselves and do it module by module, but we also have an organised system for studying the programme over a period of either 2, 3 or 4 years. So we have different structures to the programme, and I'll give you an idea of those in just a moment so that you can study it over different durations alongside your current employment. Also, just to say that it's all practically based in terms of writing reports. In terms of the assessment, we don't have any examinations. And also we include a number of group work activities which are very important to improve your employability, because all flood risk management issues require you to work as a team and to understand the sort of multiple facets that there are to flood problems. So working as a team is a really important part of employability and understanding how we manage and live with flood risks. So just to say something about the part-time study options that we have. If you want to look at study the course over a 2-year period, We offer it with 80 credits studied during your first year, so 80 credits, that's 4 modules taught over the first year, and then you do another 40 credits, or 2 modules in the second year which are taught, and finally do your flood risk management dissertation project. So that's the sort of 2-year scheme. You can also study over 3 or 4 years, and over a 4-year period you would do 2 taught modules each year. And you can see that would follow for years 1, 2 and 3, and then in the final 4th year you would do the dissertation project. So we've tried to make the program as flexible as possible and enable people to study it in different ways that suits your working or employment patterns. So finally, just to summarize, why flood risk management? We think this is a really important course that helps you learn about nature-based solutions, and particularly catchment-led approaches to managing the flow of water and improving our resilience to floods and droughts by learning to live with water better. The program's all about developing your skills and capabilities to support communities so that people are better able to prepare, respond and adapt to flooding. So building resilience is a really essential part of flood risk management, and it's core to what we teach. And ultimately, we think this course will provide you with the opportunity to become world leaders in the research and innovation of flood risk management to help protect the current and future generations. So that's what our program's all about. What I'd like to do now is invite my colleagues to come back and join me so that we can answer questions that we have from the audience. So if Tom, Stephen and Leon would like to put their videos back on again, I will stop sharing my screen, hopefully. Okay, so that should have gone back to everybody being able to see us.
Great. Thanks, Stewart. That's really good. Thanks for running us through all the details of the course. Good to see. So I've got a couple of questions. First question is coming about scholarships or additional funding for the course. Maybe you can answer this one, Stewart. One specifically about what general scholarships are in place, and also whether the Vice Chancellor's Circle Scholarship, is that available for international students?
Yeah, so scholarships are all advertised on the MSc web pages. So if anybody wants to find out the details of all the programs, they're available there. In terms of the types of scholarships we offer, anybody that's a graduate from Hull University should be eligible for a scholarship. So if you've graduated from a degree program here, you'll be able to apply for a scholarship through that route. And we also, yes, have the Vice Chancellor's Circle scholarships, and they're available in an open competition essentially. So yes, they're open to everyone, but there are criteria. There's a list of criteria. I'd suggest people look to the web pages to read through what those criteria are. But yes, anybody that meets those criteria is eligible to apply. Great,
thanks, Stuart. And we've got a question here for Leon as a present student, which is what made you apply for the course and what have you enjoyed most about it?
It's a really good question. What made me apply was the fact that this is a new course and it's a pretty new study for people to get into, and it gives us the chance to, as Stuart said at the end, hopefully lead us into a new future of just professions, industry, and hopefully help people and improve the world for quite a few people. I chose the course on what I've enjoyed most is just the range of modules we've had and the range of information we've had. And guest speakers coming in, they've been really interesting, giving us loads of different perspectives in industry and obviously experts in research. So it's, all in all, I've had such a great experience while studying here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leon. It's good answers. So I've got a couple of questions from Will Prentice. One is, I'm going to answer the first one first because someone else has asked about this, is that being based in Australia, does the University of Hull offer the MSc through online delivery? And also to follow that up, obviously this year with COVID, chunks of the course have been delivered through blended learning, which is a mixture of online pre-recorded and sort of via Zoom or Teams lectures. Is there any plans to take this forward, assuming that we're back to normal teaching in September, which is an assumption to make in itself? So I guess that's mainly about remote teaching. What is it going to carry on, and is it an option?
I think, just if I could answer that, I think that obviously there's two sort of important things in there. First of all, it is primarily a course studied in Hull. Obviously, there have been very different circumstances, so we don't currently offer it as online only. That's not how it's currently offered and configured. Obviously, it's interesting to hear if people are interested in that. It might be something that we're able to offer in the future, but currently it's not an online only course. In terms of obviously this year for every teaching environment has been very different from what people have experienced in the past, and we've had to adapt to that along with every other sort of teaching course, and we've maintained the face-to-face contact that we were able to, and practical teaching wherever we were able to do that. But obviously there has been a mixture of blended learning, as Tom described it as, where we have sort of offline, what was called asynchronous, so opportunities for people to watch videos at a time of their choosing, mixed with online sessions when we were teaching simultaneously. In terms of how things develop in the future, as Tom sort of alluded to, none of us know quite what September will look like, but when we come back to what one might think, I don't know if it'll ever be a new normal teaching. We certainly will keep some sort of blended approach, because there are benefits to it without a doubt. So there'll be some aspects of it we'll maintain as being blended. There will be aspects that we would go back to delivering as a traditional lecture format, and we will have, as I described in the talk, as much field work and practical work as we possibly can within the program. So the sort of general answer to that is yes, we will keep blended teaching where it works, because in some cases it's actually really helpful for students and it works really well, but we won't use it for the sake of using it. We'll use it where it helps the learning experience.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. That's a really good answer. So, some things you can't, teaching stuff in the field is really hard to do remotely. But some things, such as the modelling practicals I've been running, seem to have worked quite well being completely remotely taught. Maybe even better than actually being there in person. I don't know, Leon, you might have something, you've been on the receiving end of the remote teaching.
It's been interesting. It's been difficult at times, but overall, I think most of us have coped really well. Obviously, it's been a bit disappointing not being able to get into labs or into the field, but I think the course has been run in such a way that we've managed to get a pretty full experience, and yeah, I've enjoyed it so far.
Okay, thanks, Leon. That's great. So a couple, Will, I'll get back to your other question in a minute, if that's okay. But so a quick question from Amy here: Are the assessments in report format, or are they essays? Also, what referencing system do we use? I can answer some of that. We typically use Harvard referencing, but the assessments are mostly in report format. Steve, do you have essays in yours?
Yeah, we basically go with the report format. We have the essays. We also have an element of serious gaming within our module, but you're not assessed on that so much, but reflecting on it. So
I know in Chris's semester one module, there was part of the assessment was creating a poster about flood awareness, for example. In the module I teach, there's a whole series of assessments based on practicals each week. Okay. Okay, good question here from Gulam. Job roles and future prospects after doing this. What are job roles and future prospects?
I think it's huge, and there were a couple of good examples within the sort of the talking head videos that we had. I mean, certainly within the UK, but also internationally, almost every authority needs to have people involved in planning for flood risk on a multitude of levels, whether it's the sort of civil engineering type approach through to how you educate the public to ensure that they're resilient to potential flood events. And certainly in the UK, that every local authority needs people involved in that task. And I'm sure the same is true in many countries throughout the world. So that there's that sort of public facing side of things, but equally there's a whole range of jobs in agencies. Like in the UK, again, it would be the environment agencies, but again, in most countries, there's something similar to that. Agencies that are responsible for the sort of national flood protection and national flood resilience. So that there's lots of employment opportunities in organisations like that. And then there's consultancy roles. So a lot of consultancy companies are responsible for looking at flood protection, looking at new ways of delivering flood resilience. And then finally, there's the sort of academic research component to things. So you could go on to a sort of academic career beyond this. So I think there's a huge range of roles, and that's what's really exciting about a master's in this particular area. And one of the reasons we created it is because there is a demand. It's not, we haven't created it from our own interest in flood management. It is because there's a genuine need for people who are trained in this area.
Tom, can I just briefly add? So if you do a quick search on LinkedIn jobs, for example, at the moment there's 802 vacancies for flood risk, if you use that as a search term. So there's a big skills gap in this area, and that skills gap set to increase into the future as well. So as Stewart said, this MSc really is targeted at that skills need, and you know there are companies and agencies and local government entities out there that are desperate for people with the skills that come out of this course equipped with.
Okay, thanks Dan. Good question here. I work full time. Would I be able to take the course part time whilst working? And how flexible are you regarding hours? I believe we already have 1 or 2 part-time students already this year. So Stewart, Stephen?
Yeah, it's we do have part-time students on the course, and as I sort of outlined, we've made a structure up that enables people to be able to study it over full-time, which is 1 year, right through to 4 years. So we've sort of designed and structured the modules so that you can study it as flexibly as possible. You can even study each of the modules individually, not towards the sort of complete masters, if you want to do something over a much longer duration of time, or just interested in particular parts for sort of professional development reasons. So it's as flexible as it needs to be. That there's the only constraint that we put on it is there's some slight ordering in the modules, just to make sort of academic sense of what you're doing, so that you don't do one module without some of the foundations that you might need from another. But that's the only sort of small constraint. In terms of fees for doing that part-time, essentially it's a pro rata system for part-time study.
Okay. To follow on from that, another question from Will. Is it possible to receive credit for modules based on professional experience? I believe we don't at the moment, but is that something that could come in? Maybe Dan, got any thoughts on that? Stewart?
It's not normal to do that with the way modules work. So you not normally with a master's, that there isn't normally a system for prior credit to use prior credit. That's not normally the way master's systems work. It sometimes works with some initial parts of undergraduate programs, but that's not generally in the system of rules that we have for masters. So it's probably not possible at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for the answer. A question for me here. Do you have to be good at maths for the modelling module? Hopefully no. I can get sort of a grin or a grimace from Leon about this, but there are equations involved, but it's not about being able to solve them or break them down. It's about kind of appreciating what they're representing and what they mean. So it's about learning how to use models and appreciate what they do and their limitations, rather than being good at maths in order to use them. If you're good at maths, you'll probably be better at it than me.
I think it's important to sort of say that we actually created the course, and the admissions requirements for the course don't require you to come from a sort of STEM subject background, or we're not asking for that as a prerequisite. And again, this was something that was really driven when we spoke with employers when we were developing the course, that actually flood risk management in the future is going to require people with lots of different types of expertise to be able to take different approaches to understanding how we can be more resilient and how we can manage the risks in the future, because there isn't a simple mathematical engineering approach that will give us all the answers that we're looking for. You know, maths can solve some of the questions that we have, and there are ways that there are people sort of that can do that. This course is much more about a broader, the broader question of how we bring together lots of different ways of looking at flood risk to understand the problem from a more sort of holistic perspective. So we really didn't want it to be critical that you were a maths expert in order to be able to study it, and that's Tom's expertise is there to ensure that you're that he takes you through that, but he's very good at it.
Moving swiftly on, a good question from Wakas here. How long can one stay in the UK upon completing the studies as an international student? I'm asking this for job search purposes. Does anybody have an answer to this, or shall I ask another question while we find out? Dan?
Yeah, it'll depend on where you're from and leave to remain and things like that. It'll be difficult to kind of answer specifics right now, but if the relevant folks asking that type of question want to get in touch with us, we can work with our international office colleagues to provide a secure answer. It very much depends. That there have been people that have stayed once studying with us and then gone on to work as research assistants, for example, but it very much depends on the nature of your visa and the rules that sit around it, which obviously have been changing over the very recent past as well. So we'd rely back onto our international office and put folks in touch with the relevant people to help them with the right advice.
So Wakas, I think it's to answer we can't answer your question straight away, but our international office can, because they certainly deal with people from your area, and they will be able to answer that question. As Dan said, we're in a kind of post-Brexit world. Rules are changing quite rapidly at the moment, and areas of the world that were restrictive may be less restrictive in the future, and vice versa. So, thank you.
Yeah, so please do get in touch, and we'll work with you on it.
And I see Amy has responded to you on the question there, Wakas, with an email for you to get in touch and respond to on that. Okay, so here's a question which is good for Stewart. Do we gain, which might be interesting, about what practical experience is there? I mean, you mentioned the managing flood incidents course, but do we actually have any experience of managing flood incidents? That's a good one. How do you get that?
It depends what happens, but actually I'll hand that over to Stephen, who can tell you a little bit about certainly one of the things that we have planned for the Managing Flood Incidents course this year.
Oh, thank you for that, Stewart, and Tom for the question. There's lots of different ways that we try and give you experience of managing floods and flood incidents, especially in the module that happens in the second trimester, Managing Flood Incidents. We work with Humberside Fire and Rescue, and we're hoping to do some simulations. We've also got a range of practitioners and international experts who have knowledge and have experiences of going through a flood event. For example, the other day we had someone from the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and then they were here to talk through what would happen during a flood event, what their role was, and how they would work with other practitioners. We were also working with JBA and other consultancies in order to develop a simulation exercise where you, as a student, will be working and talking to first responders, real first responders, along a day's simulation of an actual flood event, and you'll be making decisions and hopefully, well, saving the day from flooding.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that, Steve. I'm just looking down to see any questions. How do you apply for a place on the course?
If you go to the website and click apply online now, I think is the simple answer. So if you type in MSc Flood Risk Management Hull into Google or anything, you'll see the or any similar search engine, you'll see the web page for the course, and there's a button on the right hand side that says apply online, and just follow through with that. And it's an online process, which is generally very quick, and you'll get an offer as soon as possible from that.
Does anybody have any follow-up questions? Because I think that's all the ones we have. Oh, one final one. Sorry. Are you able to, it's just come in, are you able to assist students on the course with developing contacts with organisations outside of the university? That's good.
Well, again, I think that comes back again to the dissertation projects in one sense. So those we very much work with a whole range of external organisations to look for projects that might be of interest to students. So students could pick up a project that external agencies are interested in working or interested in working in a student with, and we have a number of those happening this year already, working out with organisations from the Environment Agency through to the City Council, through to some representative from the Inland Water Board. So lots of different organisations interested in specific projects, but also I think through the external guest lectures that we have coming in, that also gives students a great opportunity to meet with and see people from external organisations that are directly involved in the sphere. So it gives them a link in both to sort of ask them questions and interact with them, but also sort of yeah, see what it's actually like and find out something about what it's like to work in flood risk management.
A question related to that from Gulam about the final project. Do I need to have a work replacement for this, or how do I conduct the research? Interpreting your question. Sorry, Stuart.
Yeah, it doesn't require a replacement. If we would be happy to work. Sorry.
It might mean placement. I don't know. Sorry, it said replacement, but it might mean placement.
Right. Okay. I mean, well, one answer is if there was a placement opportunity available, then we'd be happy to support and work with somebody to do that. We're very flexible about how the project works. But it isn't a requirement. We'd be happy to do any sort of project, from a sort of very academic through to a very applied project. Does that?
Yeah, that's exactly right, I think. Yeah. Okay. So a question from Anna here. Anna, does it matter if I'm getting my overall degree classification late because I'm doing a placement module which runs late into semester 3 at my present university? On the offer letter, it wasn't very clear when the cut-off for evidence is.
We'll be as flexible as possible, particularly in the current situation. So if we've made you that offer letter, then I'm sure we will be able to give you a place if you pass that. So I don't see that being a problem.
I think it's pretty much right up to when the course starts, isn't it, Stuart?
Yeah. Particularly if you've applied and made the application and you're in the system, then we'll be flexible, particularly in the current circumstance, of course.
Okay. If you need to know any more, ask another question or follow us up with by emailing eei@hull.ac.uk.
But essentially, if you've been given an offer, then you have a place on the course. I'm sorry if the letter isn't clear, but essentially by giving you an offer, you basically have a place.
Okay. Great. I'm all out of questions here. So over to wrap up to Stewart and Dan, I guess, and Stephen.
To finish off, I think a few words from myself, just to say to everyone that, and this sort of came up in the questioning, that people with flood risk management skills are needed now by employers. There's a genuine demand out there for people with the type of expertise that this course is designed to cover. And it will give you, the course will give you those skills that will shape future flood risk management. So we really hope that you'll come and join us. As a group of staff, we're already passionate about building flood resilience and understanding flood risk, and we'd like you to join us and come and learn more about it with us. We'd be really grateful. I've just put on there's a QR code up there and a link to a brief survey. We'd really appreciate if you just answer the 4 or 5 questions on that survey, so we can find out a little bit more about how you came to this webinar and what you're interested in, and follow up with any further questions. That would be really useful. But thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's much appreciated, you giving us our time, and stay in touch, and we hope to see you all in September.